Ring any bells? Precisely. Nabokov once wrote that he detested floor shows. They were beneath his refined sensibilities. Philip Carey, Mom's alter ego in Of Human Bondage, looked down with scornful eyes on conjurers and trick cyclists. In The Circus Animal's Desertion, Yeats called his inferior work a kind of act on a painted stage, featuring the stilted boys and the Lord knows what. They were not real people, but emblems from his rag and bone shop, with the implication that variety performers are something mere, an adjective predictably paired with the word entertainment. As a mandatory member of the American Guild of Variety Artists, AGVA, my father was part of a vast post-war industry known as variety entertainment. AGVA was a division of the American Federation of Labor and regulated the industry tightly. After World War II, people's attention was still uncaptured, and there was profit to be made from a culture starved for amusement in thousands of fraternal halls, nightclubs, hotels, and fairgrounds throughout the U.S. and Canada. Fred Smith of the old Al Sheehan Agency in Minneapolis, one of my father's many bookers, told me, "Acts are canned goods. Here's your corn, here's your peas, I sell 'em, you buy 'em." Of course, no one buys that kind of stuff anymore. Times have changed, and floor shows have gone the way of car fins and westerns. When the day came for Smith to close shop, he cleared out 4 file cabinets of 8x10 publicity photos from a time when stages were ubiquitous and there was a regulated industry to keep them lit. Assuming 100 glossies per inch, the total storage of his 4 file cabinets would be 560 linear inches, which comes to about 8,000 photos. Sure, there were files with multiple photos, brochures, newspaper and magazine reviews, plus the thickness of the folders themselves. So even if 10% of that number represented individual performers, that's a lot of dead souls traveling continuously day and night across North America. The Sheehan Agency, like the others, followed strict AGFA union rules. Engagement contracts had to be in standard form, typed in quadruplicate with copies kept by the client, the act, the agent, and the union office. AGFA had big clout. Union spies went to hotels and clubs all over the country to make sure that every tap dancer, hand balancer, and cigarette swallower was a paid-up member. If not, the agent, the performer, and the venue would be blacklisted, and no other union members would be allowed to work with them for risk of being blacklisted themselves. Livelihoods were at stake. If one juggled apples while eating them, made a chimp ride a bicycle, hung by their teeth, tap-danced with a peg leg, sang Danny Boy, or pulled cards out of the air, they belonged to AGFA, or they did not work. To be accepted as a member, they had to be sponsored by 2 AGFA agents in good standing, whose very existence depended on the ability of their performers to make a competent showing in places no one had ever heard of. In the 1950s, people physically interacted with each other a great deal more than they do today, possibly from the exhilaration of simply being alive after so many millions had died in the war. They belonged to organizations and clubs of all kinds. Banquets were frequent, and floor shows were the custom. At theatrical agencies, phones rang constantly asking for performers. Someone from the Fraternal Order of Elks in Grand Forks might call the Sheehan Agency in Minneapolis and say they had a $300 budget. Smith would say, "I can open the show for you with Tony Regini, who does a nice juggling act, then Myrna Tell on accordion, followed by the Human Pretzel, then Professor Merrill, who does a funny bit with a trombone, and close with the Master of Deception, who pulls a gigantic rabbit out of thin air and shakes it in a woman's face until she screams and pees in her pants. Dynamite stuff. I can throw in a 5-piece orchestra and you've got a hell of a show within your budget. Where should I send the contract?" He'd write down the address, hand it to a secretary, then take the next call. $20 to $50 an engagement was considered good money, but it didn't go very far, so my father and those like him never turned down an offer, no matter how low the pay or how